Leaders Dialogue, a very befitting topic because this is the decade to deliver. And this is where we'll get to hear from our amazing leaders who have joined us this morning. But to spearhead the session, once again, I'd like to please invite on stage Subha Sankar Chatterjee, Consulting Editor, ET Edge, so that you and we can welcome your panelists, your speakers on stage. We have with us none other than Vardhan Bansal, co-founder, Unity Group. May I please invite you, sir, on stage. May I further please invite Dr. Rajiv Kumar, Chairman of Pahle India Foundation and former Vice Chairman, NITI Aayog. May I further once again invite Sumit Gupta, Managing Director and Senior Partner Lead, Asia, Climate and Sustainability Practice, Boston Consulting Group. And may I also please invite Vaishali, Nigam, Sinha, Co-founder and Chairperson, Sustainability, Renew and Founding Chair, Renew Foundation. Ladies and gentlemen, we're talking about the leaders coming together to have a dialogue. Can we also fill it up with a dynamic round of applause to welcome all our leaders on stage? Let's get up for this befitting panel. With that, over to you.
Well, I've been given the responsibility to steer the leaders' dialogue. It really takes proactive action from the leadership to hem such a conversation, which is not only a necessity now, but an imperative as well. So we are talking about the leaders' dialogue, the decade to deliver, the need for urgent action and shift in perspectives. Ladies and gentlemen, we are at a critical juncture in the fight against climate change. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC, has literally warned us that we have less than a decade to prevent irreversible damage, which is going to be beyond redemption. Extreme weather events, and we have all witnessed them, whether it's Himachal Pradesh, whether it's Uttarakhand, or the Mumbai floods, or the floods in West Bengal, or even in UAE, the fires that we have had in Canada and in Australia, unprecedented heat waves in Europe. This is not something that we have seen, and we are possibly anticipating the worst. Globally, we have seen a 44% increase in natural disasters over the last 2 decades, affecting millions of people, rendering many of them homeless. Yet, and the reason why we have assembled today is to look at opportunities. This is the decade of opportunity as well. One where business leaders, like all of you who have come here, made the time to be here, innovators, policymakers, we need your help to shift perspectives, take bold actions, and drive systemic changes. This is, of course, the movement to move beyond incremental solutions and embrace transformative changes. The panel that you see here, the stellar panel of very accomplished people, will explore the urgency for immediate action and how leadership perspectives must evolve, must change, and the role all of us in this hall can play in accelerating solutions for a sustainable future. We owe it to our future generations, ladies and gentlemen. And of course, we have a distinguished panel of leaders who will share their insights on how to navigate these critical challenges. The panel has been introduced to you, but let me do the honors again. Dr. Rajiv Kumar, Chairman, Pahle India Foundation and former Vice Chairman, NITI Aayog. Mr. Vardhan Bansal, Co-founder, Unity Group. Sumit Gupta, Managing Director and Senior Partner, Lead Asia Climate and Sustainability Practice, Boston Consulting Group. And Vaishali Nigam Sinha, Co-founder and Chairperson, Sustainability Renew and Founding Chair, Renew Foundation. Gentlemen and Vaishali, welcome. I'll shoot my first question from the podium itself because all of you need to give me 2 minutes of your insights on what would it take from the political leadership and the business leadership to address this critical conversation that we are addressing today. What do we need to create an environment where sustainability is no longer an important issue, it becomes an imperative for all of us. So I'll begin with you, Vaishali.
Sure. Hi, thank you very much. And it's really nice to be at this event with leaders, significant leaders here. Of course, we have the ambassador from Azerbaijan, which is very critical. And I think it's these forums which are going to help us accelerate the transition.
Can I just stop you for a bit? Is the audio clear to all of you? Is Vaishali's audio clear? Because we want this conversation to go to you loud and clear. Is it fine?
I
Okay,
think they
please
say
go
it is.
ahead.
Okay, good. Maybe we can shut the doors, maybe. But yeah,
So if we could do that, if we could shut the doors. Yeah.
great. Now that we have the
Thank
house
you.
in order. See, at the highest level, if we look at countries, I think we need that sort of common purpose and messaging that we do believe that climate change is for real.
Right.
In our country, I think we are walking the talk in I guess, the most assertive manner, which is very good to see. Our Prime Minister is deeply committed to this, and I can share firsthand a small anecdote if it's helpful, that in 2011, when we were starting our first wind farm, when he was there, you could see that he was there not as a chief minister, he wasn't the prime minister then, but as somebody who was deeply committed to this area and deeply interested in this area. So we were talking about how we could use canals and put solar panels over them, where nobody really believed in the ability for us to use clean energy. So you need really committed leadership. Whereas if we go to the western side of the world, where elections are going to happen, I'm quite concerned about the change in leadership and change in priorities. Now, we've seen in the past that, our journey towards climate leadership and commitment is quite advanced. So maybe changes are not going to make us take a U-turn, but it definitely does impact the pace at which we need to get to our goals. Now, you mentioned that, the chances for us to get to 1.5 degrees by 2030 is less than 50%. Some are talking about, will we even get there by 2040? Right? So we do need I would say, consistent commitment globally. It's not going to work anymore if we have a couple of, or maybe even half the world committed. We need everybody committed. And I think most importantly, what we are seeing is that at a country level, people are very sort of committed to policies within their countries, and they're doing a lot. But we really need collaborative engagement amongst nations to work together via trade policies and so on and so forth. So let me give you an example. If we were to look at IRA, and if we were to look at the PLIs which are being offered here in our country, there are ways in which we can marry the two to leverage and have a win-win for both the countries.
Right.
But is that being done? Not necessarily, because we are looking at us, me and I, and not all of us together. So I think that collaborative and competitive approach together is very important, because competition gets all of us to take action together. On the business side, before, I know you gave me 2 minutes, I've probably crossed it. On the business side, I think it's just a question of working together with the government to identify the gap areas and feeding them so that policies can be made in such a way that we can execute. And the role of private sector really is execute, 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 and ensure that then we don't have government in our way. They're only there to provide the policy framework, enabling policy framework, the ambition, which in our country we see 500 gigawatts. That is a good recipe. And then obviously keep our eyes on the ball on new technologies and other areas which we must continuously focus on.
You've already given us a wonderful model. I see a 3C model here, which is commitment, consistency, and collaboration. Sumit, what is it for you?
No, absolutely. And it's as Vaishali mentioned, I think commitment is very, very critical, and it's good to see that now say if I rewind back 10 years back, the number of companies that were committed to ESG, the number of governments that were thinking about this actively versus where we are today, there is clearly a landmark shift. Is it enough? No. Now there is this classical dilemma in my mind between short term versus long term. Many a times, the short-term priorities, and this is true across. If I take governments or politicians, for examples, there's the next election upcoming.
Right.
Do you focus on 2040, 2070, 2050 kind of goals, or do you think about how to get the voters in place? And similarly for businesses as well, there is every quarter that you need to go back to the street, report results, and there again there is this entire dilemma that whether I should look at short term initiatives to just boost revenue, reduce cost, or whether I think about climate in long term as well. Now in my mind, if people who have really understood this actually know that there is no dilemma, there is a large range of long-term things that you can do which are beneficial for climate, actually are also beneficial in the short term for businesses, government, and people as well. And it's about three things there. The second C, which you spoke about, the communication part, becomes extremely important, which is around how do you communicate and how do you collaborate with the broader ecosystem to actually, one, make people understand what the benefits of this are, not just in the long term alone, but short term as well as then this is not easy. You can only actually access these short term benefits if we work together as an ecosystem. Whether it's government setting the right regulation, you spoke about intergovernment, I would say even within a country, government coming in together with private players, exactly as,
Right.
to actually say that what needs to be the policy framework, private players investing, executing, and then delivering. I think that is tremendously important. The frame that I mentioned earlier, the 30-30-40, and this we've researched across industries, we firmly believe that maybe it's 25 in certain cases, 35 in the other cases, but there is like the first 30%, which in the short term not just creates substantial green impacts, but also actually creates substantial competitive advantage for businesses as well. It's about identifying those, communicating those with the broader masses as well as the top management as well as with the government, and then collaborating as an ecosystem to actually make that happen.
So identify, communicate, collaborate, and act. That's what you're
Exactly.
suggesting, right? Mr. Bansal, let me come to you. I read somewhere that the danger for this planet is not about inaction. It is about thinking that somebody else is going to save the planet. So in the light of the conversation that we are just having right now, what is the proactive action that needs to come from different stakeholders in this conversation?
Good morning. So I'm from real estate industry. I will answer it in the real estate business way. First of all, real estate is now, we can say, the second largest stakeholder in the Indian economy. We all know that we are around 9 to 10% of the Indian economy, and we have to grow further. By another decade, when we have to reduce the carbon footprint, we have to grow also, and the Indian economy will be touching around 10 trillion by 2030, and then real estate will play around 10% of that. So as we said, as we were discussing, our Honorable Prime Minister, we have a great vision. We have to create or make around 10 million home every year. So that means lot of work, lot of, you can
Right.
say, requirement. On the other side, we have to save our planet, and we have to do, you can say, sustainable, you can say, growth also. So for the you can say sustainable growth, there are sometimes there are very little things which we have to do. Like in the real estate industry, we all know that we have to, you can say, bring our real estate business into a net zero, you can say, environment. Sometime at sites we do a lot of small things which can achieve our goal in a different way. I'll give you few example. Like in our all our real estate sites, we do plantation a lot.
Right.
But the plantation we do are mostly ornamental. So if we convert our ornamental plantation into a different species or jungle or urban jungle or a forest, nowadays we call it a Miyawaki forest, that will certainly change the environment in a big way. So, and it's very easy to, you can say, plant also. So as we did it on a site that only on a 500 square meter of a site, we can plant easily 2,000 trees, which are of natural normal species like people, jamun, bareda, and different type of local species.
So change of perspective. you are doing something already, but you need to do it differently, right?
Yes, yes.
So that's what you're suggesting.
Yes,
So I'll come back to you on the details of it. We're going to get into a more detailed conversation. But just a quick word from you, Mr. Kumar, as well. How can business leaders and government collaborate, and how can this conversation get bigger? Because a decade back, all of us wouldn't have assembled in this room.
Yeah, thank you, and glad to be here. I think it's time now to adopt what is now becoming globally sort of recognized as personally determined commitments. From nationally determined commitments, we have to shift to personally determined commitments, and I think this is what each business can actually do now, and declare those commitments to their shareholders and maybe even to the regulators. I think that's something that we should focus on, because I think that would be, and that's imperative, because I keep saying this, that in India we have to square the circle of growing exponentially and also becoming greener exponentially.
Right.
And so therefore that's something that is required. The point that I wanted to make is also that, mitigation and adaptation are now behind us. What we've got to do now is to have actually carbon removal from the atmosphere. And that requires a very strong emphasis on carbon sequestration programs. How do you get the carbon out there in the atmosphere back into the soil, as it were? And therefore, there are some very fundamental new technologies that are going to be adopted, whether it is for coal thermal plants or it is in situ carbon methane generation. And most importantly, the thing that I'm working on now, which I started in NITI Aayog, is natural farming, zero chemical farming. So that helps to increase the carbon content of the soil. Just one example, at 1947, the organic carbon content of our soil was 2.45. 1.5 is required to keep it arable,
Right.
and today it is 0.4. And if we continue the path that we are going on in business as usual, we will become not just an unarable land, but also the carbon would be there in the atmosphere for us to not be able to control it. So why not make a paradigm shift in agriculture, from industrial agriculture to natural farming or to zero chemical agriculture? Similarly, and I'll end there, we have to admit today that business as usual will not do. We need to have a new way of thinking. We have to address the challenges. And along with that, we have to recognize the realities on the ground, that we are at the moment 3 gigatons of emissions. At the beginning of a curve, it's going to keep increasing in India. How do you want to change that? And who are the only way that we can do it is to have a whole of society approach, whereby you need to create platforms where government, industry, academia, and civil society come together on a regular basis. We tried that at NITI Aayog. I think we need much more and much bigger effort for this to happen. Otherwise, we will not succeed if there is continued mistrust between these 4 stakeholders, which I can tell you exists at the moment. Thank you.
Right. So we need to mitigate that mistrust, but there's a larger conversation there, Sumit. At one level, we are talking about cleaning the earth. We are talking about taking measures which are going to give us a greener world. At another level, there are systemic problems. Now, how do you change mindsets, drive people into action? People now realize there's a problem, but how do you work around the system? In your experience, what are the critical steps that can be suggested to ensure that at a system level, things can be mitigated?
Sure, Subha. In my mind, actually, this is a problem or an opportunity which is facing each and every one of us. I think, if I just go back in time, there have been a lot of cases where, top management has taken a decision and, it's just been passed through that, okay, this needs to be done. It could be a ordering of a new capex. It could be, a new project being installed, etc. I think this one requires a significant mindset shift. I think the amount of impact, we always think that, if we have to transition towards green, it has to be only the big things. What comes to mind is, renewable power, CCUS, and, green hydrogen. Of course, those are important and those are critical to be done. And without that, can the journey be complete? Maybe not.
Right.
But in addition, there are a number of smaller things that can be done as well, which is, what we were talking about, the pledge that you asked us to take. I think that's a fantastic starting point, that, we, each one of us realizing what can be done. But when we go back individually into each of our businesses, institutions, there are a number of smaller initiatives that we can drive. A recent study that we did actually pointed out that in some of the heavy emitting industries, actually close to 8 to 10% of the emissions can be brought down through routine measures, not requiring significant capital investments as well. This could be on energy efficiency, water conservation, a lot of other things, on the gas efficiency, etc. as well, and how do you actually orient the entire process systems. So one, I would say mindset at the, not just the top level, but actually at the grassroots level as well. Second, the thing that we have seen is many times people think it's an unsolvable problem. That's something which cannot be solved. And even before I apply my mind to it, I would just give up. That, okay, ye to ho hi nahi sakta.
It's a lost case.
Yes.
Right? You've given up hope.
We have given up hope.
Yeah.
Whereas actually, with the amount of innovation that's happened, there, I would say pretty much maybe barring the last 10%, everything is solvable. There is a cost attached to it, but there are means and mechanisms to make it work. The idea is to go out and individually, we cannot solve it. There is a full-blown ecosystem. It could be, new age startups, some of the old technology companies, institutions, academicians, universities doing a lot of stuff in this field. It's about how do you actually go out and ask for help.
Right.
So realizing you cannot solve on your own and actually going and asking for help becomes very important. Third, I think, which is more important, going back to what Mr. Kumar was also saying earlier, I think it's also important that, in this particular area, there is a traditional bias that whenever government or politicians or, institutions see industrialists, they would always feel that, there is some hidden incentive behind anything that is being asked.
Right.
I think that part around clearly bringing it out, that why is this the case? Why is this needed? And not asking for the moon. Because, everyone has a budget. Can India equate the IRA? I don't think we have the financial muscle to do that. But can we take substantial steps to actually do what we call as in the classical consulting work as the top right quadrant, which is the most impactful and maybe requiring the least intervention, that those kind of things, which little bit of support from the government. I am sure the world would love it, the country would love it, all of the people would love it as well. So in my mind, those three things, not just top level, starting from grassroots, looking at interventions which can be solvable, and then of course working together and asking for help and going out and trying to solve it together rather than trying to solve it individually within a company. There is nothing to lose. Actually, it's a lot of competitive advantage that you gain by doing something like that.
Right. So it doesn't have to be overwhelming changes. We are not looking at dramatic changes, but even small steps can add up to a big difference, can make a huge difference. Vaishali, in that context, let me come to you. Mr. Kumar raised a very important question about partnerships. And he said, if the government, businesses, civil society, and the academia come together, this story could look very different. Now, across borders, how can these stakeholders come together and create a story, create a narrative that will look much better, brighter than what it is today?
I think that's a great question, because I think that's my sort of central point on this panel, that, I'm optimistic. I feel that we have come a long way.
Yeah.
And I also feel that we should stop looking at the government to always take the first step and do something about things.
Right.
I think if I look at it bottoms up, I think we need individual responsibility, which you mentioned, sir, on the individual ownership of what we can do. I think sometimes it's not about cost. It's about momentum and laziness, about doing things differently. If I decide not to buy an apartment which has not been made in the best practices, I'm sure there will be people, with no offense, but, people are going to care about it. So I think the power of individual action is tremendous. And I don't think enough is being done. We can do more. So let's call ourselves out to do more. That's point number one. We have, again, the Prime Minister came out with the Life Mission, which has been a fabulous direction in which we can all sort of adopt lifestyle changes and do a lot more. Then I go to institutions, right? The private sector, academia, whatever, various institutions can do their part.
Right.
And then you have the subnational. So you have the subnational and national level engagement, which is the other piece, which we can do a lot more. And international, so collaboration there is also so collaboration in all these pieces is important. And from national, we go to the international level, which I feel for us to drive the change at a much faster pace, whether it is on critical minerals, whether it is on where we, produce green hydrogen and where we need to ship. We need these cross collaborative trade pacts, which will enable our journey to scale up and do more. Because, green hydrogen, fabulous announcement. Again, agility of our government, that it was something out there where something needed to be done. We came up with a green hydrogen policy. If you look at our country, look at SECI. It's one of its kind. I think others emulated us, where there's more transparency, it's helped us to do projects more effectively, efficiently, transparently, bring the cost
Right.
of renewables down, etc. So I think let me give you some examples of what we are doing at a company level. So while we can wait for, again, governments to collaborate, that's not that's very important. But I think what we are doing, I'm seeing as business, we have, for example, there are the private sector is getting involved in buying clean energy. I think we saw 30% plus growth. He's the numbers person, so I have to be careful. But in this particular sector, everybody is looking to green their supply chains and so on and so forth. Data centers, huge opportunity. At Renew, we have not only done business with players like Amazon and Microsoft, but also partnered with them for social impact on the ground, for environment justice fund, to work in the communities where we are setting up their projects. So that collaboration is real. It's on the ground. It's happening as we speak. So if we can scale that up, which we are looking to do, but all of us can come together across boundaries to do a lot more. One last final point I
Sure.
wanted to make. As COP29 came into the picture, it's our observation that the need to go and explain to the government that please do this and that for us has gone down a lot more. Given the COP competitiveness which comes in, they want to do more themselves. So they are coming and having those conversations, and we have roundtables with policymakers, ministers, secretaries who are taking note of our feedback and very quickly in an agile way coming up with policies which are useful. And I do believe that in our sector, for example, land is a big issue. And so we must identify key areas which are going to provide the inflection point for us to scale, because the whole game is to scale and execute, to do better with respect to emissions.
So the conversation can get bigger, larger, more progressive once we embed purpose into it. I think the sense of purpose, and of course what Sumit also mentioned earlier, communication to an audience which literally needs to take action, get into that idea that yes, this is something that I need to change. I think that will also drive this conversation to a much more proactive level. Mr. Kumar, I live in a small village in Uttarakhand. I mean, I live there almost 8 months in a year. And I see a lot of people who want to set up solar panels on their rooftops. The first critical question that they ask is, how will I fund this? Now, if I extrapolate this to a larger conversation, funding for sustainability is a bigger question. These are questions that go beyond profits. These are questions that need to be addressed. But at one level, I'm reluctant to invest in it because I don't know the returns that are going to come. How do we convince businesses? How do we convince critical stakeholders that this is important and you need to look beyond profits?
Well, one, congratulations to live in Uttarakhand. I have also live in a village in Uttarakhand. It's called Thadhanchuli, near Mukteshwar.
We are
But
close.
There you go. So that's also getting spoiled, by the way, because of the brown cloud,
Yeah.
which is now happening, and the Himalayas are now capturing a lot more carbon than they used
Right,
to do.
absolutely.
So that's the. But on the funding part, you see, I think it's unrealistic to think of businesses not focusing on profits, because that's their job, that's their business. The question is as to how you can how can you induce them to do good. I think it's Jack Flink who said that, the Blackstone guy.
Yeah.
How to do well while doing good.
Yeah.
Right? So that's the whole idea. And I think there are now technologies which can enable you to do this. It can enable you to make profits while at the same time looking at the green imperative. So that's one issue. But on the funding issue, I think the important thing is for the government to now lay down long-term, clear incentives for people to adopt certain practices. Now, if you do that, and then you, me, and everybody else, if we know, for example, that we can have solar rooftop panels, and we will be able to feed in to the grid and get monies out of it for the next 20 years, each one of us will make the individual effort to do that. The policy uncertainty, the policy predictability, I think is the key here for both the industry as well as individuals to make the move towards the green imperative. Now that's something that there, by the way, what we need is to get all the energy related ministries, not just in the central government, but also the state government, to come together to form a kind of, if you like, a green mission, so that all of them can work cohesively and not in pillars. While you're saying that, let me sort of give two suggestions here.
Sure.
One, I think it's time to move out of Delhi and to go to the state capitals. The real action is there. That's where the rubber meets the road, and we're not doing that at all. I think and we in Pahle India Foundation are actually going beyond that to try and make districts the fulcrum of development. Because that is, again, 3 million people in a district are good enough for us to push initiatives and new challenges forward. So that's the decentralization of conversations and of policy implementation, I think, is the key. That's first suggestion. The second suggestion, because of COP29, and I was there in Dubai last year, is for the emerging economies to now give up this conversation about North versus South and to create a coalition of the South and say, this is what we are going to do, and we are going to help each other in making this possible. And just as an example, I know that China today mines 3 billion tons of coal. And we only do about 1 billion, and about 67% of our installed capacity is, of energy capacity is coal thermal fire. They have developed technologies which are way beyond in terms of clean coal technology and carbon sequestration. So if the southern countries, the countries of the south came together and agreed for technology transfers and agreed to help each other in doing this, that is when we can show to the north that we are more concerned about tomorrow, because tomorrow is ours and yesterday was yours. I think that's what you need to do at the COP29 or any COP coming tomorrow. Thank you.
Sumit, you have a point to make here.
Wanted to add, I think, fantastic points by Mr. Kumar. I think just one other thing. I think we always feel there is a dearth of green finance. I think, we as a consulting company actually have a view of, how different players are thinking about this. So on one side, I'll just give you a live example of, a couple of projects that we are doing. There is a industrial player who wants to invest in a new technology. There is a new technology player which is available, which wants to partner. But the business is thinking it's, risky because we don't know what the outcome will be. There is actually a fund which has funds to invest in technologies to encourage, this entire, new green technology, and they are actually willing to, take the hedge. However, it's just that the three don't know each other. So it's very important also at times to, just ensure that you look around and you actually get this entire ecosystem in place, so that maybe everything cannot be bridged. I think the measures that Sir mentioned on policy and, thinking thoroughly through this are very, very important. But I think at the same time, there is enough and more capital which is available. It's just that it's not been duly utilized and duly known where it can be got from, which is the knowledge gap that can be bridged and action.
So how can that knowledge gap be bridged, and what needs to be done? Because if you are saying that there's enough and more capital, then why are people not accessing the capital?
I'm not saying it's enough. I'm saying there is capital.
There is capital, right?
At least to start with. Of course, it's
Yeah.
not enough. Enough requires governments to intervene as well.
Yeah.
But I think just knowing, getting to people who understand these spaces well, coming as a part in groups like this, and thanks to ET for organizing this entire thing as well. I think that's the only way to get it out. I don't think there is a single source, there is a single website which says, okay, these are the funds, this is what's available. But once you get connected in that ecosystem, I think the opportunities are immense. But of course, it will solve a part of the need. There is still policy and interventions required as all countries coming together to make it happen.
Let me quickly turn to the audience and ask, and if you could make a note of it, I'll come back to you in the Q&A session. What are the roadblocks to making this conversation bigger, and how can the communication reach the bottom of the pyramid as well? Because that's where the action is as well. Let me come to you, Mr. Bansal. In terms of corporate social responsibility, that's a mandate now. I mean, you can't do without it. Now, why can't that seamlessly flow into this conversation? And why shouldn't companies, why can't there be a framework where businesses can be more accountable to the idea of sustainability within that structure of CSR? How can that be implemented?
Structure CSR, you can say every company have nowadays, but sometimes, as we were earlier discussing, the government role is also very important. So CSR, we have, every company have fund of CSR, and they can, you can say, use this for in the nearby. Like I will give one example, like the waste management we are doing at our site. So nowadays government is asking for CSR investment in waste management. So there are some new technology are coming, like the waste management, the dry and wet segregation, but people were not aware where to put this CSR money. So lots of things are now being done for CSR initiatives also. And one, you can say, small initiative I'd like to address to the audience, that like Delhi have the worst example of this climate change. Now this November have this coming, and lots of AQI will come up and all the construction will be hard.
Right.
But the fault is of the stubborn burning. So what government should do, they are not penalizing they cannot penalize the farmer for this stubborn burning, but they can certainly, you can say, incentivize or initiate, or you can say communicate with the company to put CSR to, you can say, not to burn this stubborn, and the stubborn can be used for a ethanol or something which is useful. So CSR certainly can be used by the company for the initiatives which government can take up or government can communicate to the companies.
Right. So we have come to the end of this conversation very quickly, Sumit, and this is a subject that's of real interest to me. How can technology be a savior in this? What are the critical technologies? We talk about AI, blockchain. There's a lot that is happening in the emerging technology space. Anything that can save the day for us?
I think technology is a key integral part of sustainability. I think in the new age world, nothing works without technology. I don't think we can function without our phones. Forget a day, even an hour without that is very, very critical. If I really look at some of the innovations that have happened, I think whether it's on the entire reporting framework, which has now become as automated as possible because of technology. It's about some of the new innovations which are coming in, which actually use a lot of analytics and data to actually come up with what's the right predictive model to run our organizations, industries in the most optimal manner, which again leads to a tremendous climate impact as well. And then of course, as you think about recycling and circularity, traceability becomes extremely critical as well, which cannot be done without being empowered by technology. There are a number of other examples, but as you said, we've come to an end. But I think how we leverage this, one, on the data and analytics and the AI side, to actually create more opportunities to drive sustainability, leverage innovations on technology side to actually track, like the traceability side. And then finally, how do we get a combined ecosystem where you are actually not just leveraging one but multitude of technologies just coming together on like platform equivalent measures to actually create the impact will become extremely critical. There are multiple players right now. It's again just about how you stitch it together to create the maximum impact for your organization. That's the puzzle that needs to be solved.
Right. So thank you very much, Vaishali, Sumit, Mr. Bansal, and Mr. Kumar. A decade back, we wouldn't have been in this room discussing sustainability or discussing SDG. It is not only important, urgent, but it's an imperative now, and we understand the need for it. And I think there is hope. If we move towards an action plan that's going to take us to a greener, brighter future, I think we can still live in hope. On that optimistic note, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being with us. Unfortunately, I don't have time for a Q&A session, but we'll come back and we'll discuss more. Thank you very much.